Well, good morning, everyone. I hate to stop the chatter. I know it's very fun when you get to gather with your national colleagues who all share in the mission and the importance of this work. Grateful to be with you here today. So my name is Courtney Hills-Macbeth. I love the COE community and feel honored to be with you to kick things off today. I was with you all last year on a Career Pathways panel and grateful to be back today. I spent 20 years working at a large public university in campus-based roles, and so it's always nice to be with my community. Recently, several years ago, I joined Strata Education Foundation, where I lead out our programmatic efforts around student access, retention, completion, and thinking about post-completion outcomes and how to really ensure that all students can feel and succeed in their academic and their career pursuits. So great to be with you this morning. We have a great panel here today with 3 experts, and we're excited to get going here. So the title of today's session is Strengthening the Links Between Post-Secondary Education and Economic Mobility. All of you are on campuses really ensuring student access, success, and now we're really thinking about how to ensure students have that career success and what it takes to link education and work. This is an extension of the work that COE started on last year and is continuing, and we'll talk about the new Career Opportunities Initiative and the different aspects of that. So let me first introduce our speakers here. Miguel Angel Cambrai is the Vice President of Global Philanthropy at JP Chase. He brings, thank you, I love it, Miguel. Miguel brings a lot of experience with him. At JP Chase, he focuses on the firm's workforce efforts, helping to create and advance equitable growth strategies aimed at addressing skills and career pathways gaps for students and workers from underrepresented communities. Miguel has 20 years of experience in program implementation and grants management, and he is also, most importantly, with this community, he was the director of the TRIO Economic Opportunity Center at National Louis University. So welcome, Miguel.
Gracias.
Next on the panel, we have Dr. Jean Rhodes, who's the Boyden Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She's devoted her career to understanding and advancing the role of intergenerational relationships in intellectual, socio-emotional, educational, and career development of marginalized youth. Dr. Rhodes is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and Society for Research and Community Action. I really want to commend Dr. Rhodes on her being a full professor and really thinking about how to take her expertise and research and moving it into action to make a difference in the field. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Rhodes. And our third panelist is Darren Jackson, founder and chair of All In Milwaukee, which supports higher education completion for Milwaukee students from low-income backgrounds. Darren was the CEO of Advance Auto Parts from January 2008 to 2016, and his previous roles included Chief Financial Officer of Best Buy, Carson, Peary Scott, and Nordstrom stores. Darren is also the chairman of the board of Wolfspeed and Ready Rebound. He previously served as the chair at Marquette University Board of Trustees. So an amazing perspective here coming from the employer side of things, and commend you on dedicating your career now to thinking about the connection between employers and universities and colleges and how to ensure student success. So thank you for being here. So before we shift into our panelists, and then we'll get to Q&A with all of you, I want to just take a minute and challenge all of you to put down your phones for a second, and I want you to think about a student that you've worked with. Now, many of you have worked with hundreds, if not thousands of students. I want you to think of one student where you've had a really big impact. So just everyone close your eyes for a minute and think about that student. What was that student's name? What was their story? What was their journey to your institution? And what did you and your team do to ensure that that student was able to persist on your campus, was able to thrive, was able to gain the social capital, overcome the self-doubt, gain the confidence, and ultimately graduate from your institution? All of you have played an amazing role with that individual student and many others. And so as we talk today, I want you to continue thinking back to that student. For me, that student is Eduardo. What did it take for them to succeed at your campus? And what we're talking about today is that additional step. What does it take to help that student succeed beyond completion, succeed into that first job? Because that first job matters. The salary that a student makes in their first job determines that income trajectory that they have over their lifetime. So the conversation that we're going to have today to kick things off is really about that step to connect their educational experience to that thriving career. So keep that student in mind as we have this conversation today. And I just want to also say, I have my deepest respect to all of you as you do this important work on your campus for that individual student and many, many more that have immense success because of each one of you. Okay, so we're going to keep that student in mind as we have this conversation today. Now, Jean, we're going to start out with you. Recently, a Harvard Kennedy Center report came out from an interdisciplinary group that's there. It's called the College to Jobs Playbook. Encourage all of you to look that up if you haven't, the College to Jobs Playbook. And this report identifies 13 evidence-based practices that are going on across campuses to connect education to career. So, Dr. Rhodes, as you read this report, can you maybe share with the audience about what these interventions are and then how this relates to the TRIO and COE community?
Absolutely, thank you. The report by David Deming and his colleagues is really an eye-opener, and it really draws attention to the need for better college to career pipelines. That whole ecosystem needs to be better integrated, because for the first time in American history, we're really calling into question the value proposition of higher education. And this is because in a recent study which they cite, 40% of college graduates had gone into jobs that didn't even require a bachelor's degree. The American public is starting to question the value of higher education as tuition skyrockets, as does student debt, which is coming due very soon, and saddles students with lifelong disadvantages in many cases. Employers are beginning to question whether colleges can produce a diverse, skilled workforce. And so we need to really do much more, according to the report, to bridge that pathway and support that pathway from the very beginning of a student's college journey. And so what they do, looking mostly at minority-serving institutions, is they identify 13 different practices that colleges take on to try to improve that pipeline. It ranges from apprenticeship programs and mentoring and coaching, career coaching and guidance programs, to co-op, internships, all of those things that colleges do. What they note, however, is that many of those efforts, however great they are in isolation. They're siloed. They're siloed within colleges, within even departments, and they leave it to the student to try to seek it out. And what we all know is that the more advantaged students often are the first ones to seek out opportunities. And so what it does is it actually widens the opportunity gap in many cases, because students are left on their own. And early administrative missteps, students not completing an application in time, students not knowing how to pay a bill or whatever, can just set a student up for real disadvantage. They fall behind. And so there's a need for that integration and collaboration. But the collaboration doesn't stop within the university. they make a full-throated argument that the collaboration has to be with the business community. There needs to be opportunities along the way, and businesses need to invest in those opportunities early on. And that's one of the very strongest arguments they make. The other thing they argue for is more personalized approaches. Not every student has the same career needs, the same career issues, and mental health is becoming more and more of a concern for, and I see it as a college professor, but we all see it, and so we need to kind of take a whole student approach. And one of the ways that they argue to do this is mentoring and taking a more sort of concierge approach where each student feels a connection and feels that they have somebody that they can turn to that can help them with their particular constellation, whether it's, they're newcomer immigrants and they're struggling with language and they need this service or that service. We need to take that whole approach. And that's one of the things that I'd like to talk about later, which is the career opportunity initiatives, because it really is about proactive support that is integrated and connected to the whole career college pipeline.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes.
Sure.
So, Miguel, given your 20 plus years working with students directly, now you're sitting in a funder seat at JP Morgan Chase, really such a valuable thing for them to have you and your experience working with students directly. We know that low-income, first-generation students face barriers to post-secondary and career success more than their affluent peer colleagues do. Often the need for skill development and wraparound supports can extend beyond completion into that first job. So have employers started to embrace the idea of delivering supports that can help attract and retain first-gen talent? And if so, what do those look like? And sort of what are some of the examples that you're seeing from the field in the seat that you're sitting in?
Gracias. Buenos dias, everybody. Thanks for the question. When I applied to JP Morgan Chase, I'll never forget, I'm a year young to the foundation. One of the questions they asked is about what is your position or experience that would make you the best candidate, and I appreciate the 20 years of experience. And when I was in the field, I used to think folks with over 20 years experience were old, and they just knew too much and they had to get out of the field, right? But at the time when I was being screened, I talked about, they already knew that on paper, but the years prior to that, or the decades prior to that, I grew up in extreme poverty on the south side of Chicago. I outgrew, violence, and I'm a former perpetrator of violence. So not only did I have the skill base and the training, right, through formal institutional learning, but I also had all that informal learning. So I think at the time, I felt like that made me a stronger candidate to be able to kind of bridge the gap between economic and career mobility for low income or people of color. And I think currently, part of the praxis needs to be not only on the wraparound services, bridge development, on the participant student side, but there also needs to be some sort of diversity and change at the employer side, right? And I think that that has to move on, and you all know more than me, beyond like data-driven recruitment hiring, but more so culture and culture shifts to sort of engage and retain people of color sort of in this generation and this ability to learn. So I think the field's moving in this space, and I think employers are sort of in a position now more than they ever have been to sort of adapt to sort of new modes of learning, new modes of integration, whether it's through cohort-driven models or apprenticeships or sort of internships that lead to full-time employment, early engagement, early career exploration. I think there's a lot of ways now that employers are trying to engage a culture of learners that they probably haven't experienced in the last 2 decades. At JP Morgan, we're 300,000 employees worldwide, which is a small city, right? A big city in some cases, right? So I think that's one of the things that drew me to JP Morgan and Chase, the $30 billion diversity and inclusion commitment, but also the idea that if we could figure it out at JP Morgan Chase, of how to lead in employer onboarding for people of color or low income or low skilled learners in development, we can kind of teach it to the other entities of how to do it and how to do it right.
It's great. And with all of you on your campuses and your regional economies, the COE network is really positioned well that you have all of these amazing students that oftentimes employers say, we don't know where to find diverse talent. And your ability to think about the programming and your students on your campus and how to connect that to the employers in your area, while there's this moment that they're looking for diverse, untapped talent, and you are shepherding and advising and mentoring these students on your campus, that connection to those employers, it's a real opportune time to do that, and with your expertise of the supports and the wraparound services needed through internships, through project-based learning, through those practicums, et cetera, is sort of a really unique opportunity, and part of what the Career Initiatives opportunity is thinking about that mentoring and social capital building to bridge that, so.
And I also think that we should learn from the healthcare industries before us that we know that referral systems don't work if they're paper-based or handoff-based. I think what we've learned is that, now we're talking about soft handoffs, now we're talking about intrusive advising, and for a lot of communities of color, it's less of a deficit and more of a culture integration, right? Mm-hmm. Like in the Latino community, we've had the comadre network for centuries. And if you don't know what the comadre network is, it's all your aunts that sit around the table and negotiate what your future's gonna be. So that's pre-existed, these formal systems. I think now the systems are catching up to understand that, cohort integration is important.
It's great, very good. So Darren, tell us a little bit about what's happening in Milwaukee that you're seeing with the All In Milwaukee project and initiatives.
Yeah, so maybe I could build off of what Miguel said. 20 years ago, I got started in Pilsen with the Cristo Rey School.
I'm from Little Village.
Yes.
Yeah, down the block.
It's now a network of 39 schools, high schools, and it's going to begin the journey where All In Milwaukee picks up, is that as we were trying to figure out how to grow this network from Pilsen to 39 schools, high school kids go to school 4 days a week and they work 1 day a week. Mm-hmm. And they work in a diversity of experiences from healthcare to JP Morgan to Accenture, and they rotate. And what you see is that when we started it, we were trying to figure out how do we put college education, college prep education back into the central city and make it affordable. And so how can you do it for a tuition under $1,000? And we embarked on it vis-a-vis a program that we call Work Study, and we thought it would pay the bills. Boy, we were wrong. It did so much more than that. It built social capital, relationship capital. By the time our kids graduated high school, they probably had 4 different work experiences that did this incredible thing called spark imagination. Mm-hmm. It gave them confidence, and it showed them a pathway to a future. But then by the time they got to college, and I would say this, is by the time they got to college, we saw that they were graduating at a 36% rate. We said, how could that be? And what you realized is in these transitions, in this complexity, there wasn't navigation in a way and support that was going to help them finish the journey. So All In Milwaukee is really modeled after a program in Minnesota that I was a part of called Wallen Education Partners. We've been around for 30 years now. We serve low-income kids. We have a graduation rate that's not 36%. 87% of our kids are students of color, and our graduation rate is 91%.
Wow.
And what you realized, it wasn't practices, procedures, or policies. It was personal relationships. And each one of these students of ours was assigned a coach, and we helped with financial aid. We helped with their community. We brought them together in cohorts to go to college. It wasn't an individual endeavor. And so as we looked at that journey, we began to ask the next question, and 5 years into it, I thought, at 90%, this shouldn't be an isolated example of success. So our family started all in Milwaukee. I'm actually have had the privilege of knowing Dr. Arnold Mitchum for 25 years. He's one of my mentors. I thought, how can we build this program in a way that we achieve the next step, which is transition into careers, ultimately with the goal of replanting in our local communities. Because the goal shouldn't simply be to graduate college. The goal has become not simply to transition into careers, but how, as Dr. Mitchum started EOP 50 years ago, how we build the leaders of the future. And so we integrated from the beginning kids coming into our program, which is a college transition and career transition program, simple things. Everybody gets an advisor. And it's not 1 to 2,000. In our program, it's 1 to 80. They all begin the first part of the bridge experience with a program called Use Science, which begins to help kids imagine their career futures and places they might go investigate, as opposed to just guess. And then there's curriculum development support, but then everybody begins the career transition journey as a freshman year. 90% of our kids will have a paid internship experience. 99% of our kids are kids of color, and 100% of our kids are low income. We just finished our first graduating class last year, and our graduation rate is going to be 93% on the 6th year. And so what we're seeing, and we just finished our placement rates for our graduates, and it's 93%. And so part of it, thank you. Part of our learning is really, it takes me back to Cristo Rey, is the formation process in terms of the opportunity process with corporations. Today, Cristo Rey enjoys 3,000 corporate partners. So that tells me in the corporate world that I came from, there's definitely interest and support. We're in the journey of actually working together on the transitions to make it effective, and what gets in the way sometimes are practices, procedures, and old policies. What makes it work is actually connecting with the people in a way and seeing the potential of our students and beginning the process of helping them work within these business communities.
So as we think about the business communities, Darren and Miguel, how, we're all sitting here on college campuses, and we know it's important to connect our students with career opportunities, and we hear this term employer engagement, employer driven. How do you engage employers? How do we encourage more employers to implement some of these interventions? I mean, Miguel and Darren, as you watch this, how do we get more employers engaged?
I think in part is peer-to-peer learning, no different than sort of, student work, right? I think, when Jamie Dimon speaks, folks listen, right? And I think he's pioneered sort of apprenticeship. And I think we also have to be honest with ourselves in terms of shared accountability, right? I think employers have to take accountability for the disruption or the gaps that we see today. I think it's important. Sometimes when I think about my 20-year history, a part of it is my own self-accountability to say, even though I've been doing this for 20 years, even though millions of folks have been impacted by career pathway mobility in communities of color still lag in the economic access and benefits side of the house. College degree or not, we haven't been able to threshold specific economic ceilings for the last 40 to 50 years, which is embarrassing, being the capitalistic country that we are. And I think capitalists or employers are also now starting to take accountability for the mobility and career mobility for folks. and they're thinking of new ways. So I'll give you an example. Again, what drew me to JP Morgan Chase is, my former colleagues or family would be like, we've never saw you going to the dark side, right? But in Detroit alone, we've invested over $200 million to create remote and accessible employment opportunities for people with limited infrastructure for transportation, childcare, and access to additional community resources. So we've created 100% remote jobs in the city of Detroit to stimulate economic access for communities that can't access them for a viable sort of different variation of reasons. So those are ways that I think employers, and sitting part of cohort tables, round tables, shared experiences, shared investments, is going to continue to chip away at the creation of career opportunities for communities of color.
And I hear you saying there's a mission and compelling reasons for employers to do this in the last several years. There's also the stark reality that unemployment's 3% or below in a lot of areas, so there's acute workforce shortages and needs, which is a great meta context for this conversation, because employers need and are being pushed to think about new ways to bring in talent across different ways. So I view it as we should take advantage of this moment where employers are just practically pushed to find new talent pipelines. What a great opportunity. Having managed employer relationships for 15 years, like this is a time to strike while the iron's hot of employers need talent. We should take advantage of this opportunity and this timing right now with the economic conditions, plus the companies who also see sort of the importance and the mission of it.
And the federal investment's coming down, right? We know that. We're in DC currently, right? And we know that the infrastructure investments and the billions of dollars going into different regions, it's a momentous time, so for sure.
The State Higher Education Association, SHIO, does an annual survey of the top priorities for their state executive higher ed officers. And the number one issue and the number two issue that came up in that 2023 survey is workforce needs, and K-12 teacher shortages. So even for your state higher ed leaders in your state, those workforce shortages and needs are the number one issue that they are addressing as the higher ed leaders in your states. So Darren?
Yep. So we can think about building better relationships at the highest macro level. I tend to think about like the TRIO programs. The TRIO programs help show the way. They're not necessarily a full university, every single college, but it's an example of excellence. And so I think when I go back to our campuses, I'll give you just a couple ways to think about it. You can try to solve it across the campus, which will be very hard. But you have certain employers that are very motivated, more motivated than they've ever been before, and these organizations, that motivation or self-interest, because they're trying to solve a problem. When we say there's great workforce needs, of course, but where could there be ones where uniquely we can start out with those that would lead and show the way? One of the ones working with Marquette in our program is we're going to be 1 million nurses short in this country. It's just the math. And you look at the diversity of our nurses, I know in Wisconsin, the diversity of our nurses is 2 to 3%, which is an abject failure. And so, but if we look across our country, unless you live on that coast, that failure is everywhere. So, the healthcare systems are very motivated to fill their hospitals with nurses. But when you start to peer into our university systems and ask the question, what are we doing at maybe a specific college level to build the pipeline of nurses and build the relationships, because there's more jobs and more demand for diverse nurses than there's ever been before. When we try to solve the whole problem, I think we suffer from a term I like to call exhausted mediocrity. Versus spending time trying to look at challenges. Nursing is just one of them. And when I went to Marquette, my wife and I have been married 35 years, she's a Marquette nurse, and we said, this is just an enormous challenge. Less than 10 years ago, we were educating we had 500 seats on a campus of 10,000 for nursing. Next year, we will have 2,000 seats at Marquette for nursing. And it required opening another campus, and less than 5% of our nurses were diverse less than 10 years ago, and it's approaching 30% this year. If we tried to solve it across the campus, we wouldn't get there, because it's just too hard to move the macro. But interesting to see that what starts to happen is other colleges within the university see what's happening, and the employers line up because you're meeting a great need. And so that's how I tend to think about it. Where do you have shared goals and shared interest, and where do you use the moment for momentum?
The moment for momentum, that's good. Like it. So we've been talking about employers. Let's shift to the student side of things. Dr. Rhodes, with your lifetime of literature and basing your work in evidence-based practices of mentoring with your center, as you sort of look at this landscape and your key leadership role with COE in building out this career opportunities initiative, which Strata's supported, tell us just a little bit more about the evidence-based practices of mentoring and why that's so critical in this conversation about the COE community collectively and for each individual here on their campus. Why does this mentoring aspect and social capital matter so much?
Thanks. Well, I mean, let's just start with the idea that mentoring really works, but it is unevenly distributed. And that's really an important issue that we need to solve, because if it's left to its own devices, left naturally, it will reproduce inequality. And I can give you, well, I'd love to give you a synopsis of 30 plus years of researching mentoring, but I'm going to give you some highlights. And one of them is the Gallup-Purdue study, where they looked not just at college graduation, they looked at people they had been following for many years, and they looked at midlife happiness and life satisfaction. And they said, what are factors that predict, this is 60,000 college graduates, what predicts midlife life satisfaction? And 3 out of the 4 predictors had to do with mentoring. One was I had good relationships with my professors while I was on campus. One was I was in an internship that aligned with my interests, and I had supervision and peers mentors. And what you see is that across the board, it's that connection. We talk about, I think Miguel said, the healthcare just referral system doesn't work. What works is almost, I would say, the hotel system, the concierge, having one person that opens the doors, that points you in the right direction. And we can scale that support through mentoring, through peer mentoring, which is inexpensive and replenishable. Every year there's new credible messengers in the form of juniors and seniors who can help incoming students. So it's something that's there that we're not harnessing well. So that's one study, and I think, the issue about internships, and you've studied this a lot, Courtney, is that it opens doors to what you like to do, which is really like, we think about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the pursuit of happiness to find something you love, and so many students don't get that opportunity. I heard this great saying the other day, we all heard of grit. And probably some of us have interrogated that grit is this internal thing that keeps you going in the face of adversity. And somebody said, you know what? Grit is fit. If you fit in, if this is a good fit for you, you will have grit because you'll want to persist there. And that's what mentors can do. They can put you into those opportunities and open new doors that take you deeper down those paths. Another study that I was involved in, we looked at something called the Adolescent Health Survey. If you don't know about it, our country has been following the same cohort since they were in 7th grade and then 9th grade and then when they were 18. And I had the opportunity as a member of this MacArthur Foundation network to put in a question about mentoring. And we entered that in, and so 30,000 students in this longitudinal cohort answered it, and then it's continued, this incredible survey. And so I had all these data, and we looked at mentoring, and we looked at that question. And here's something really interesting. First of all, mentoring was way poorly distributed. It was the wealthier kids who had mentors. But more importantly, the type of mentoring was poorly distributed. That is, the wealthier kids had what are called weak ties. They were more likely to say their high school teacher was their mentor, their employer was their mentor, their camp counselor was their mentor, whereas the lower income, more marginalized students were more likely to have what are called strong ties, people they knew very well, maybe their grandmother, their aunt, but not wonderful relationships, but not necessarily someone who can write a letter of recommendation, open opportunities. And so we have this opportunity gap in mentoring, and we can't leave it to chance. So one of the things that I've done with Dr. Joan Becker, who's somewhere out here, is develop something called Connected Futures, where we actually, rather than giving mentors out, like assigning mentors, we teach young people how to build social capital. We start by teaching college students the value of mentoring, what it can do, because that's not always instilled, and it's not a weakness to ask for support. And then step by step, well, how do you handle rejection? How do you leverage that relationship? How do you give a 3-minute elevator speech about your interests? All of that, and we've been studying it for over a decade, and it leads to better jobs, higher graduation rates, and more. And so I believe that we can solve this equity gap in mentoring, but we have to do it carefully. Here's what's not careful: most mentoring programs. And I don't mean this because I've been studying mentoring my entire career. This is my life's work. But I have looked at the data, and most mentoring programs are ineffective. The effect size is small, despite enormous investments. Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, foundations, they're all investing in mentoring programs, but they're getting something wrong. And that is that it's not just a placeholder. It's not just a warm body. It's not just you put somebody with a mentor and everything goes. There has to be a focus to that relationship. There has to be a goal focus. And I recently conducted the largest ever meta-analysis of mentoring programs. And what we found, again, the effect size was the same as it was 20 years ago. But if you look at the variable of whether this relationship is targeted and goal-focused, it is 2 to 3 times more effective in moving the needle on every outcome we care about: mental health, education, career development, behavior, all sorts of things. But it has to be career-focused and targeted. The second thing about this is the mentor has to be well-trained. You know, I'm a clinical psychologist. I had 6+ years of training. We put people with maybe 1 hour of training in the lives of young people who don't necessarily know how to manage all the complexity. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be thinking about mentors as a paraprofessional workforce that we can shift tasks to. You know, we'll never have enough nurses, but we can train paraprofessionals who can help, who can be that first line in what's called stepped care. The first line of support, and then they can shift, it's called task shifting, they can shift to a higher level of care as needed. But let's get those mentors who are so generous with their time to be more effective, to use that hour in ways that are goal-focused, in ways that they feel efficacious in what they're doing. And that training doesn't have to be all up front. It can be ongoing, but we need evidence-based training for the mentors that we put in the lives of young people. And we also need to integrate the mentoring across the person's entire development. So not every mentor is going to be perfect for that thing. So I could say, all right, I'll be your mentor, but if something comes up around a particular career, I'll connect you to somebody else. Let's not think that there's one savior who's going to come along. Let's distribute that. And so I was not the originator of this incredible initiative, the Career Opportunities Initiative, but I am so brought in. And thank you, Courtney, for your support of this. And thank you, Tommy and Jennifer Weidler and Dr. Joan Becker and all the others who have helped. Let me just tell you quickly about what we're doing. So when I looked around, I had just finished writing a book on mentoring, and I looked around at all the college platforms that are out there for mentoring, and it's just repeating the same mistakes I have seen in mentoring programs forever. It's just, let's put people together and give them perfunctory training and, you know, hope for the best. So I created a new platform called Mentor Pro, where I brought in basically everything I knew worked in mentoring. It was just my best shot. And just around that time, I partnered with COE and to create this Careers Opportunity Initiative. And It is set up to say, look, students in TRIO programs, students at my university, I work in the third most diverse university in the United States, 67% non-white. I have worked with TRIO students my entire career. They often miss opportunities because they don't have a nudging middle-class parent to say, did you apply for that internship? Did you do this? Did you sign up? Oh, that didn't work. Let me call this office for you. They don't have that, but they need mentors who can be that person. So it's not enough to put great opportunities in the path of our students. They need a connector. They need that person that can connect. And so using this Mentor Pro platform, we get students to, remember the goal focus finding, to decide what their goals are for this relationship from the start, to signal every week what are their challenges that are blocking them from reaching that goal. And there's a push notification that tells the mentor exactly what those challenges are. So it's not just like, oh, I'm your mentor, reach out if you need me. There's constant cues to talk to each other. And we meet college students where they are, which is chatting. What I have noticed from being a mentor is students are, and I have 3 kids around their 20s, they are not comfortable just picking up the phone. They want to text. I was mentoring a student last week, and she couldn't pay her bill because she kept calling financial aid and saying, how do I pay this? I'm not calling, going to the website. She was about to get let out of all of her classes because she wasn't able to register because she couldn't pay her bill. She had to call the bursar's office, not this financial. And it was like all these little missteps, these administrative missteps. And one of the missteps that can really derail a career is not getting those internships. Because a lot of students, first of all, they don't know that they need to apply the fall before the following next summer. So we get them prepared for that. But let's back up. Before they apply, let's get that cover letter right. Let's get the resume, so it's not just a resume that's generic. If you have a resume for a nursing job, it should look this way and that way. And let's talk about your career narrative. Let's talk about your cultural wealth. Let's talk about how your background led you exquisitely to this position. And a mentor is there to sign off and help them every step of the way. The rubrics that we teach the mentors, because remember, mentor training is everything. And once the student passes the resume, passes the cover letter, passes the job interview, the mock interview, passes the career narrative tests with their mentor, then they apply for that internship and they're ready to go. So that's just some of the things where we've baked research into this new Career Opportunities Initiative.
And I so much commend COE and you for taking that evidence base and thinking about how to really design based on evidence the nuance around mentoring and connecting students through the Career Opportunities Initiative. So I have many more questions for the panel, but I actually want to turn to the audience because we want to open up this dialogue and really think about why is it so important for your community, for programs like TRIO, McNair, others, to think about strengthening this connection between post-secondary education and economic opportunity for students. So I believe we have a couple mics on this side and this side where I invite you to come up and let's open up the dialogue. To our panelists, please feel free to come forward to the mics and ask any questions that you might have. Let's see, I see a mic here and I was told there might be others.
Looks like there's some in the back also,
There,
back middle.
There.
And it's a little tough for us to see at the back, so perfect. We've got someone coming up here. Thank you for being the first brave soul.
Absolutely. My question is for Ms. Rhodes. What curriculum do you recommend for our mentors? Have you created a curriculum that we can have access to? Is there a name for it? How do we find it?
Well, thanks for asking. It was made in collaboration with Dr. Joan Becker, who was the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Massachusetts, Boston for many, many years and knows what students need. And it's based on the NACE competencies, SMART goals, and best practice. I wrote the elements of effective practice for the National Mentoring Partnership, which has been downloaded by 10 million people. We took that best practice. We collaborate with a person out at Northwestern University who has really mastered what job skills training looks like. And we've baked it into a set of trainings that we developed and are available. And so maybe, Courtney, you can talk about how to gain access to those.
Sure, so this, maybe you can direct them to exactly what to Google or the
Yeah,
website?
so you can Google mentorpro.com, or if you just want the courses, Google academy.mentorpro.com, and all the courses are there. Now, they're not freely available. I think you need to be part of the COI program, but we encourage people to join that program, so.
Right, so the Career Opportunities Initiative program, and I believe the COE leadership will be able to follow up with links and make that widely available. It's great, thank you. Back here.
Over here.
Oh.
Good morning, panelists, and thank you for taking your time to speak with us. My name is Wayne Davis. I'm from a small community college. We don't have a lot of big corporations or businesses that we could partner with, but one thing that you mentioned that really sparked my interest is teaching our students how to find their own mentors. So what would you think would be, like if I wanted to create a workshop on teaching my students how to locate good quality mentors for themselves, what do you think should be our jumping off point?
Oh, go ahead.
I won't answer the mentoring piece. I'll leave it to my colleague here, the mentoring expert. But I just your opening statement kind of triggered a thought. Two things. Obviously, you have the Aspen Institute that supports community colleges in the national network. I would encourage you to look into Achieving the Dream, which is also a community college platform to support. And JP Morgan Chase has about $150 million commitment to sort of support community colleges across the country. So I think on the first component of your opening remarks is just sort of maybe connect to these already existing invested in platforms, and I will just defer the mentoring piece to the experts.
You know, recruiting a mentor is doesn't naturally come to many, many students, and I know this. I see the ones that kind of make it through the Byzantine path to my office, and it's intimidating. And so we have created a program called Connected Futures, and actually with funding from the William T. Grant Foundation, we did a randomized controlled trial of it with over 700 students, and also thanks to Dr. Joan Becker, and it really works. And so I encourage you to reach out to me if you'd like. We can get you that curriculum and make sure that other students learn, because it really comes from the National Guard. That's where this idea came from. They had something called youth-initiated mentoring, and it's the second largest mentoring program you've never heard of. But basically, they take students who have dropped out of high school, who are unemployed, and they put them through career training. And a stipulation for joining that was that they had to recruit a mentor, because the idea was when they returned back to their communities from being on these bases, they would slip back into the same peer network. And so they had to have a mentor sign off on every stage. And so with MDRC and MacArthur, we evaluated that program, and it really works. When students recruit their own mentors, they're much more invested in that relationship. They also pick people who share their interests, who often have a long-standing connection to them, and it gives them cover. Students don't want to just come up and say, will you be my mentor? But they can say, hey, I'm in this program that requires me to recruit a mentor, will you be my mentor? And it just kind of lowers the bar for them in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And I'll maybe answer that question in a slightly different way. There's other platforms that offer micro-internships or project-based learning, which is sort of a lower risk, sort of easier way for students to find more short-term types of internships. So some of those platforms, there's an organization called RIPEN, R-I-I-P-E-N, Parker Dewey, Forage. These are tech platforms that have taken a lot of employers and created shorter form micro internships or project-based learning that students can go directly on their websites to obtain short-term internship-like experiences. So that's another way to think about if you can direct, if your institution doesn't have that built in already, there's these other types of sort of social enterprises that have popped up to reduce that friction and create connections between the employer and shorter student opportunities that are experiential based.
Yeah, And alumni networks are very good for this.
Great. Back here?
So I have a quick question because I came in on the end, I guess the tail end of the conversation regarding nurses and the crisis that we're currently in. I guess my frustration and thinking through this is how do we address the existential crisis that's happening in our country right now, given the fact that minority communities, and particularly even the African American community, is the most giving community across the country. How do we address where we make sure that these students are able to go to school for free, knowing the fact that if you do provide them the education, and if you do provide them the opportunity, they're going to go back into the community and be of service, be nurses, be others, roles that can obviously help our nation.
I would just say start by addressing the counter narrative to what already exists as a social construct. Black and brown communities have been going to school for decades, right? Historically, black colleges existed during the slavery days, correct? I think we have to start using strength-based approaches to engaging our communities and have realistic connections to continue to change the social narrative of what folks understand our limitations to be and see those more as strength-based approaches to why they need us in the workforce, right? I think I struggle with healthcare, not because of accessibility and affordability, but because there's a CNA cliff for a lot of people, and especially women of color, in the healthcare industry. So once you get to the LPNs, or you get to the nurse practitioners, or when you get to doctors or specialties, there are less and less and less of us, right? So I think one way that we can start is start showcasing this narrative that there are more black men in prison than college. This is untrue, and it's unfounded. There's a disproportionate ratio of black and brown people in the prison systems, but that's separate and apart from how many of us have already completed an educational degree, right? So I think continuing to educate systems and continuing to strengthen our community understanding of our, to your point, successes as being, there is no free lunch program in this country without the Black Panther and the Brown Beret movement, period. Period. So until we continue to value ourselves as experts in our own field and experts of our own narrative, they'll continue to use us as a fraction of diversity and not a fraction of excellence.
Wow.
So the online chat is buzzing with everything that you've said, and a great question has emerged. Do you think that we may not be beginning early enough with age groups in our efforts to holistically improve financial engagement and learning within all of our communities?
Great question. I can't quite tell where that's coming from.
I think it's God.
It's online.
It sounded very omniscient.
It's coming from the metaverse.
That was the metaverse, and someone has a future career in radio announcing. So I actually want to answer that question with the other one here. What we're seeing across the country that perhaps for me is the most exciting development in this last year is a lot of learn and earn models.
Yep.
This is where employers, particularly we're seeing health systems, say we haven't served our communities well, and we need to now work in close concert with our surrounding higher ed institutions to create new models of learning where, as the employer, they are continuing to pay either full-time and or three-quarter time paraprofessionals who are working within the health system, and then carving out time during the day, this is key, for those individuals to continue to get more certifications and training to be able to skill up into those other pathways. So there's these learn and earn models that are coming about across. I was on the phone yesterday with the state of Washington, who's looking at this with large regional health employers. A parallel to this is, so there's acute workforce shortages in healthcare fields, CNAs, MAs, et cetera. We also have massive teacher shortages. So there's a new model coming about called an apprenticeship degree, This is the notion that we need to expand the definition of apprenticeships beyond welders, plumbers, et cetera, into teaching, healthcare, et cetera. So now teachers as an occupation is registered with the Department of Labor in more than 25 states. And there are these apprenticeship degree models where students or adults, working learners, don't have to choose a college degree or an apprenticeship, but rather you can combine Pell dollars and WIOA funding to create a four-year pathway for communities who are already working in their schools, who, by the way, reflect the populations that they serve and will stay in community, can get a teaching degree while working full-time in their schools. So this is a moment where these learn and earn models, employers are working with the higher ed institutions to redesign degrees where working adults can continue their education, be working full-time, and get that credential for zero or a very low dollar amount, where I think there's a lot of promise. So these are just emerging in these last several years. There's some old models that are informing this, but I think that's something to watch in your communities are these learn and earn models.
And I think those are collateral consequences to what I'm talking about, the social constructs, right? So if you think about both nursing or if you think about both teaching, they've always been associated with low-wage, women-led,
Yes.
women-oriented employment. And a lot of folks are like, don't be a teacher, it doesn't pay much. Well, here we are.
Right. And
Right.
the practicums are either credit or for pay.
Correct.
Why do we say that when in welding you can get the credential, get paid at the same time? So some of these are accreditation and policy issues that need to be deconstructed.
And I'll just add that mental health is another area where there's a huge gap. There's never going to be enough trained mental health professionals, and we need to turn to these paraprofessional models where the students are earning while they're learning to be good therapists, because you don't need an MD to be a good therapist.
And we know technical careers have been downplayed for the last 10, 15 years in this country, right? And now we're seeing a cause and effect to that. And we also know in higher education, there's a ivory tower hierarchy of who's better than who and who's smarter than who. Obviously, that's why the University of Chicago created the community college systems of the US, right? To put the other over there and put the smart people there. So those are the things that I challenge you all as TRIO affiliates to continue to push at the social constructs for why education is access to economic success.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with the point. We need to look further back in the system of formation, that 40% of our students come from the Boys and Girls Club. And in the Boys and Girls Club, they begin the journey of formation and community and accountability. And I think as our kids come through the clubs in particular, they also come through the United Community Center, which is similar in a different part of the city, is that we watch these experiences of growth, formation, relationships, and accountability in terms of their journey and support. And one of the things I would challenge this group as you go back to your universities is that you have to peer in, what I've seen is we'll pick a lot of challenges, but sometimes we need to actually go back within our own institution and ask different questions. And I remember, I'll use the example of, I asked, University of Wisconsin-Madison's one of our best partners in our program, Marquette is, Carol and others, but I asked the question in 2020, if you study your iPad's data on degrees conferred, not simply kids graduated, like where are the obstacles within your own institutions for Black and brown and underrepresented students? So I asked Madison, how is it in 2020 we graduated with 7,300 graduates, less than 10 of them were Black accountants? And so look at your nurses, your STEM, and then ask within your institution, what are the roadblocks that we're putting up? So in our infinite wisdom, when we went from a 4-year accounting degree to a 5-year accounting degree, we took many of our underrepresented students out because of affordability. So we have to ask different questions now, like should there be fixed fee degrees? Oh, that might actually extend out the time, but actually the outcome would be better. That would be a different model. And I think today, there's so many challenges. I get overwhelmed by the challenges, but I think we have to turn our attention towards, like TRIO was and is, COE could be center of excellence too. That an example of how we're helping kids get through, but within our own institution, what are the unseen obstacles that keep our students from being engineers, nurses, accountants? And I love the arts and sciences, but I'm saying we have our own imposed obstacles that I think we have to be advocates within the institution to remove and create alternative paths for these higher paying jobs. Yep. And so that's part of the mission that we've taken on, is that where are the obstacles just because of policy, procedure, and practice, people are not willing to challenge the status quo.
Thank you, Darren. So good. We have 1 minute left, and so thinking about the obstacles that you point out, what are the opportunities for each of you on your individual campuses and then within the COE community? So in the last minute here, 15 seconds by each panelist, what would you want to leave the audience with? Miguel?
Just continue the best practice that you all know as regional experts of your students, and figure out how to connect, this is a panel on connectivity, to your regional opportunities, if not through national entities, also just through local regional entities, to continue to further success for your students.
Mine would be about evidence and evaluation. And just because you think it works doesn't mean it does, and so you should continuously interrogate, evaluate, and improve whatever it is you're doing, and add mentoring to whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. Ask the hard questions. Find new solutions.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists. Appreciate you joining us today.